Welcome to The Secret Life of Mothers. My name is Maggie Gordon-Walker, and I'm the founder and director of Mothers Uncovered. Join us as we explore and share the incredible stories of mothers when life has thrown at them challenge and, in some cases, trauma. Discover how the skills we learn in matrescence, which means becoming a mother, can teach us about more than motherhood. They teach us also about unconditional love, resilience, and acceptance. I'm joined today by Daisie Lane. She will tell her matrescence story, which means becoming a mother. She will share some details of her depression after she became a mum that might be upsetting if you also had a different experience. So please be mindful of that. Daisie is a mother of two and writes poetry about motherhood, which she shares online. She speaks honestly about maternal mental health, has run various workshops encouraging mothers to write about their experiences, set up an online community for mothers who gave birth in lockdown, and has published 2 books.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on, Daisie. Perhaps you could start by telling us where in the country are you based, and is this the same area as you grew up in?
Yeah, I was born and bred in Wolverhampton in the West Midlands, where I currently still live. So in what's known as the Black Country, a very working class urban part of England. And actually, I did my family tree a while back, and we had a bit of a laugh because I managed to go back something like 300 years, and we were all
Wow.
still here. So many of my ancestors living in the same town, all living just a few streets away from each other. So yeah, it doesn't seem like we've ever been a family of wanderers and great travel, and I've not
Oh.
broken out of that tradition either.
So no rogue kings or queens in your lineage?
Unfortunately not, no. Maybe if I go back a bit further, I might
Maybe.
find
Well, we
some,
must be
but I'm still
related
going.
to. Okay. Well, obviously it's got a very strong community where you are, and if
Yeah,
that
it
works,
has, and
then
it's
good.
family ties, and I'm a home bird, so I can't see myself ever. Well, I've still got family here, and my mum, my nan, we're all, so close. I think I'll
Yeah.
stick around.
Oh, well, I think that's lovely because I think part of the trouble of becoming a mum is a lot of women these days don't have that family
Yeah.
support because you're fairly well now on the younger side, I think, to become a mum, but
Hmm.
most people get to at least 30, and so you've probably worked,
Yeah,
traveled,
yeah,
and you may well have left the area you grew up in, and then suddenly, oh,
yeah.
no family support. So
Yeah,
I think
that's
that's
right. I meet
lovely.
so many women, so many mothers who say, my mum is so many hours away, and I just can't.
Mm.
My heart just sinks because I think I couldn't do motherhood without my mum with me.
Yeah.
I just couldn't.
Yeah, well, that's lovely. You got such a good relationship with her
Yeah,
because that's obviously
yeah,
not always the case.
yes.
Um, so Daisy, what would we need to know about you to understand how you would describe yourself as a mother?
I think having just mentioned her, I think the first place to start would be to look at my mother. Um, I am my mum through and through. I am her. My mother is the biggest influence on my parenting. I've always said I've got the best mum in the world, which I know everyone says, but I have. And we're so alike, and everyone says how similar we are. My mum is like my nan, her mother, and my daughter is like me, and so I think we're just repeating each other as the generations move through. Um, but yeah, I think my relationship with my mum and how my mum mothered me gives a good understanding of how I mother. I mean, that's nothing groundbreaking because we know how we were parented has a tremendous impact on the way we parent. But fortunately for me, it was a wonderful experience. And the only way I can describe my mother's parenting is just simply love. As a child, I just remember my mom as being warmth and comfort, affection, safety, home, just pure love. And I've always thought if my children feel that about me, I've done my job, I'll be happy. And so I learnt from her, I guess. And that was just how I naturally then mothered my children. Um, And then I think the second thing is looking into my own personality. I'm a learner. So whatever I've kind of been faced with in my life, if I don't know what to do, I'll try and find out. I'm a reader, I'm a researcher, I love learning. I'm just that way, and I have been since childhood. Um, there are positives and negatives to being like that. I can also be a bit of a perfectionist and I'm too hard on myself. But when it came to motherhood, I've always wanted to learn, 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 learn. And I'm not just talking about the basics, the books that most people read when they're pregnant and things like that. I'm talking about never stopping learning as your kids grow, child development, child psychology, the impact of parenting, trauma, you name it. I'm always I want my eyes wide open to as much as possible for my children. And I've always just tried to go the extra mile to understand my children to the point where I drive myself mad with it sometimes, but it's all done again out of great love.
Yeah, I think they are. That's amazing to sort of take that kind of put that sort of depth into your
Mm,
learning. And I think,
mm.
like you say, a lot of people read a couple of books and then perhaps there might be something in that that frightens them. They think, oh, I'm
Yeah,
doing that. I'm a bad mum, and they run away and they don't
yeah,
address it. Whereas
yeah.
the more you read, the more different viewpoints
I think
you'll
so.
find, and then you find your own way.
I think we put so much focus on when we're pregnant. We
Mm,
read up such a lot on pregnancy and then perhaps birth, but thereafter we kind of just try to muddle through.
mm,
Um, so I've tried to continue that learning and absorb as much information as I can from other people as well, because we learn from others. Um, so I do think that sort of want to learn drops off a little bit when baby comes, because obviously that's life, isn't it? You don't necessarily have time to sit and read a
no.
book or whatever, but I try to learn in so many different ways, and what I absorb, online and things like that, I try to make it rich in teaching.
Yeah. Wow. That's impressive, Daisy, that you found the time to do that because that was
Yeah,
important to
thank
you,
you.
and I think that's great.
Yeah, yeah,
So yes, your birth you mentioned to me was quite
yeah,
traumatic. Do you want
yeah.
to take us through a bit of that?
Yeah, so the birth of my first daughter was something I struggled to come to terms with for a long time. She was 4 weeks early, so it was kind of unexpected. My waters began leaking, but they hadn't completely broken, so nothing was happening. And I had to go into hospital and be induced because of the risk of infection and whatnot.
Mhm.
So I was induced alone, because we were in the middle of a lockdown. So this was 2020.
And
So I
was
was
it, sorry, was it right at the start? Was it
it
March,
well, it
April?
was this was the end of May. So
End of May. Okay.
uh
Yes, full
still
blown.
very
Everyone had been
new.
locked
Yeah.
down for a couple of
Yeah, it was
months.
still
Yeah.
the first lockdown, and it was still, we didn't really know much about it at all. It was just a very frightening
Mm.
time. I was frightened to death. First baby, didn't know what to expect. I was so terrified of giving birth and my husband missing it. Um, anyway, fast forward, I'd been on my own for a couple of days at this point, and then I was eventually taken into a delivery room, and that was when my husband was allowed to join me. And I was about 5 centimeters dilated, and what they did was they broke the rest of my waters, and bang, my daughter came out. So that remaining water around her was all that was holding her in, basically. So I went from about 5 centimeters dilated to she was in my arms in, I think it was something like 16 minutes. So it was extremely fast, extremely intense. It was unmedicated, I hadn't had any, unfortunately, any pain relief. So the level of pain was off the charts for me. They had to turn the drip down, the induction drip, the oxytocin, because I was contracting too fast and too intensely. And because of that, baby was in distress. And so it all felt like panic station. Um, but what was most difficult for me, and I think most contributed to my trauma was being physically limited and restrained. I know that sounds bizarre to say restrained, but that is how I remember it to be. I had the monitor around my belly, as a lot of women do, and it kept slipping down, and they were really needing to monitor her, so I was having to keep still. But I was attached to 2 different IV drips, one in each hand. And honestly, at one point, my hands were crossed over like this. This way,
Straight jacket.
yeah, exactly. That's just how I felt like I was. And the way this one particular person had done the wires, I was all tangled up. Goodness knows what was going on. So it felt like I was in a straitjacket. And every time I
Or
moved,
a caged animal, something like that.
yeah,
Just,
that was
yeah,
the whole
horrible.
feeling. And every time I moved my arm a certain way, the wire would catch and it wasn't dripping through, and it would start beeping. So they'd ask me to keep still. And someone else came in later and looked at me and said, "What on earth's going on here?" And they were trying to sort out all the wires as best as they could, but I couldn't move around the room freely or even get off the bed. I didn't leave the bed. I couldn't turn over. I just came to realise and accept that I had to stay on my back on the bed. And we kind of know that that restriction of movement is detrimental to birth in a physiological sense. But the big thing for me was what it did to my mind. And I think that was the key to everything for me, to my unraveling. Because it had all felt like it was being done to me, and I wasn't an active participant in the birth of my baby. I had no control. It was completely stripped from me. I felt extremely vulnerable.
Yeah.
Um,
Were
and
you angry as well at what had happened
yes,
to you?
yeah,
Yeah,
it's more so afterwards on
yeah.
reflection. Um, but yeah, anger was definitely a prevalent emotion. And the room I was in, honestly, it was tiny. My husband and the midwife kept bumping into each other. He kept knocking things over. It was a cupboard, this room was. Having seen
Mm.
other rooms, I remember walking into this one and I gasped. They had to move the bed so that the staff could move freely. It was just so ridiculous. And I later learned I had a birth debrief, that this was not a regular delivery room, but because of the pandemic, it temporarily was. So goodness knows what this room was that I've been put
A
in.
broom cupboard. That's where you gave
Yeah,
birth.
it probably was. So everything was just kind of really clunky and awkward and just not how it was supposed to be. And I
Mm.
remember feeling pretty quickly like this bubble had burst and I was just disappointed. And I remember at one point I needed a wee during labour, and the midwife just looked at me as if to say, "How are we going to get you to the bathroom?" Because you couldn't physically have wheeled these 2 stands that I was attached to into the toilet. It was just a mess. And she said, "Oh, we're going to have to move this one here. And if we move the bed," and I ended up saying, "Forget it. Have you got a bedpan? Forget it." And the relief on her face. And so I weed into a bedpan on the bed. It was chaos. And,
Mm.
this was my first baby. I'd never given birth before. If that was me now, I'd like to think I'd be more vocal about some of the things that happened and the way I was treated, but I just thought this was normal. And throw into the mix as well that we were in the middle of lockdown. And so all that we'd kind of been told for the last few months was how completely burnt out our midwives were. And you could see that there were, when you were there,
Mm.
they were short staffed. It was chaos. So that kind of added to I can't say anything. I can't complain. They're just trying their best. You just had to kind of be grateful and accept a poorer standard of treatment, to be honest. And that's something in the work that I've done with other moms who gave birth during that time, that's something that was prevalent. Um, but yeah, just going through my birth, I was put in stirrups towards the end. I don't know why. I didn't want to be. I wasn't asked. My legs were just lifted up, and things happened that I didn't consent to. They used a ventouse. They performed an episiotomy on me. I didn't know that was happening until I was being stitched back up. And there was a point where I just completely checked out. I dissociated. There was a consultant who came in at some point. The details are very hazy, but all I remember is him saying to the others in the room, make sure she understands, make her understand. Because whatever it was he was saying to me, which I don't know what it was, I just wasn't responding. I had just completely been pushed to a point where I couldn't engage with anyone. And I thought I was dying. And that's a really important thing to say because I know I'm not alone in that. I've heard that said many times before.
I felt I was dying in my
Did you?
first birth.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I just thought I mean, in such indescribable pain,
Pain.
and no one
Yeah.
seems to understand how much pain I was. Just
Absolutely.
like,
Yeah.
surely
Yeah.
I'm about to die. It's
Yes. Yeah.
incredibly
You
frightening.
are. You reach such a limit that I either thought I was dying or I wanted to die. Horrible thing
Mm,
to say, but that was the intensity of the feeling. And we kind of need to sit with that because once baby arrives, it's like you just have to forget about that. You know, you've got this beautiful, healthy baby, you did it, so be happy. When actually, I'd just reached a low point that I'd never been to before in my entire life. I'd never before thought I was going to die. I'd never before wanted to die. But in that
mm,
moment, I did. I'd completely given up and sort of just succumbed to what was happening to me. So to go from that to suddenly being expected to show up, smile on your face, tend to this
mm.
baby, sleepless nights, in at the deep
Yeah.
end, all the rest of it. It's absolutely mind blowing. And, you know, we're
You
expecting that of too many mothers.
yeah. You said you did have a birth debrief.
I
How
did.
long did you have to wait for that, just out of interest?
Um, it was at least 12 months after, I think it might have been she was 18 months old. I reached out to the hospital and asked. It wasn't something that was offered to me. It wasn't something that I actually knew about. They didn't sort of provide any um, prompt on it.
No, because
Um,
the waiting list is so long. What's the point of
yeah,
telling you?
yeah, yeah. I'm sure it was she was about 18 months old. So I definitely had time to reflect and somewhat process. And you know, I knew I wanted another baby, not that soon, but I knew I would eventually
Mm,
want to be ready for another baby. So a big thing in me wanting to heal from that was in preparation for me potentially getting
yeah,
pregnant again because I thought I can't go through that again. And I need to heal from this and understand what happened and what went
yeah.
wrong.
It's
Um,
so infuriating. I mean, all new mothers should be offered a debrief
yeah,
within a few, three
absolutely.
months at most. And people say,
Absolutely, yeah.
"Oh, but we haven't got the money." But it's just like, but look what
Yeah,
happens when you don't.
yeah.
You, because of your reading, perhaps, probably because of your family support, maybe because you're very
Hmm.
strong, manage to get through them. But a lot of women don't end up in a
Yeah,
mum and baby unit, which is tier 4.
yes.
I've
Yeah,
found out. I don't know at the moment the current cost of it. I thought it was about £1,500 a night. I've been told it's way more than that. It's
yeah,
just
I
like,
can
why is
imagine.
there not investment into that?
Exactly.
Crazy.
Prevention is better than cure in
Always,
these.
always.
And there's so many women I have spoken to who had no idea that a debrief existed.
Mm,
I didn't until I think somebody reached out to me on Instagram or something and suggested it, and I had to Google what it was. I had no idea because, like I say, it's not something that certainly my trust didn't actively offer it. I must say, when I had it, it was extremely helpful to me, and the senior midwife who I spoke to was fantastic, and she validated me. She apologized to me and she said categorically X, Y, and Z should not have happened. And that in itself was exactly, it was exactly what I needed to hear to help with my healing, because I was validated, and my trauma was validated. And she did say to me, what happened to you was not acceptable. It shouldn't have gone this way, and we should have done this. And she actually said, I'm going to speak to X person about the way they behaved, and so it's so valuable, because I felt like that was the beginning then of my healing. Um, so yeah, that was kind of my birth story. It kind of ended with baby was born. I remember baby was taken away for a minute or two, and my husband was speaking to me from the other side of the room, and I hadn't got a clue what he was saying. I remember thinking, what is going on? What is this? What's going on? I couldn't understand what had just happened. I couldn't speak. I couldn't cry. I just felt very numb. I started shivering and shaking, and my teeth were chattering. I think I was in shock. There was no instantaneous rush of love that you hear about, because mentally I was still back there, really in my head. In my head, I was still 5 centimeters dilated and waiting for someone to get me some pain relief. That had just been a few minutes prior. So I couldn't comprehend that my baby was now here on my chest. And very, very quickly, my husband had to leave because of COVID. And so I was on my own. And I was taken down to a ward, and I didn't see him again for 5 days. I didn't have any visitors. It was a zero visitor policy at the time. So I was already
So
on the,
heartbreaking for
yeah,
you and for him. I mean,
yeah,
he's just become a
yes.
dad and he can't.
Yeah, he struggled too.
Of course he did.
He just had to keep himself as busy as he could, but he missed the first few days of her life, and I was already on the back foot with what I'd experienced. But those 5 days, that isolation and that loneliness, I was obviously extremely sleep deprived. I had a baby who she wouldn't be put down. I was, she needed me to carry her all the time. She was that type of baby.
Because she'd had such a fast entry into the
Yeah,
world, she was a bit
yeah,
thinking, well, hang
exactly,
on, I thought we were at five
exactly. Yeah,
centimeters. What's going on?
yeah. So I was delirious. I was
Yeah.
delirious. All I remember, I don't remember much of those first few days, which is extremely sad, because those were the first few days of my baby's life. But I just remember crying. My God, I sobbed. I just wanted to go home. And my mental state deteriorated each day I was there. And by like day 5, I think it was, because the reason we were kept in was I was fine, but baby was she got jaundice and things like that. She was struggling. And by day 5, I said to the doctor, I've got to go home. I demanded to go home. I said, I I know my baby will thrive better at home, where I've got that support, because here I can't be the mother that I need to be. I
And you
need
needed your
that
loved ones
support.
around you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And she discharged me. And it was the best thing. I needed to be at home. And baby thrived from there. As soon as I got home, she thrived. I was never the same after that. When I got home, I was a changed person. I was traumatized, you know.
Mm.
Um, and then obviously from there, we were still in lockdown. we were still all collectively, as a community, as a country, as a world, we were terrified. Um, we were all sad in different ways, because we were isolated from our families. I didn't have that, although we talked about that village, and I'm very lucky to have that now. I didn't have that in the first few months of my baby's life, because we weren't allowed to have it. So early motherhood was tough as well. So I felt like I could never recover. I was never able to get my head out of the water. Um, so
I'm
yeah,
really
that's,
touched by your use of the word terrified about that
yeah,
then at that point in time, because as quite often the case, there's a lot of stress put on how children were impacted, and their delayed development and all that. But as per usual, nobody really thought about the parents, and specifically the mothers who have to give birth alone, and the absolutely mammoth impact. I mean, it's stressful enough anyway, becoming a mum. Then you add that into, terror all around you and what that did to you. Quite astonishing.
Yes, I think we all, pregnant or not, we all experience this collective trauma, but we all just experienced it on different levels. Because everywhere you turned, it was death. You turn the TV on, you turn the radio on, it was death, death, death. It was how many people have died today. And it was this fear, especially in those early days, this fear of you getting it. This was pre-vaccine, we didn't know anything. I remember seeing on the news a pregnant lady had caught COVID, and she was in intensive care. So at this point, it was all fear. We were frightened to death. And when you're pregnant, all you want to do is keep your baby safe. And you don't know if you can do that, because you think, if I get it, what will happen to the baby? Or when the baby's born, I'm going into hospital. Hospitals were a breeding ground at the time for COVID, so you were frightened to even be in the place that you needed to be. So this fear, when I say terrified, it was, my God, it was real. It was real. We were all terrified. It was around us everywhere. It was palpable in the hospitals, and everywhere, every appointment I attended, pregnant, every antenatal appointment, up until the point they stopped doing them. It was fear. You could feel it, and that must have had an impact on me during pregnancy as
So
well.
let's hear a bit more about those first few months and the impact, and that's what led to you with the work that you do around the writing, I think.
So when Lily was born, I struggled, and I was eventually, I went to my GP, and she diagnosed depression, put me on antidepressants, which for me personally helped. It enabled me to see some light at the end of the tunnel. And then kind of along with that, we started coming out of the lockdowns, and there was more support available slowly. So that also helped. And I can't exactly remember how it started, but I've always kind of shared things online about motherhood, just poetry and things like that. And I started to talk about this. I started to talk about the lockdown thing and how that had impacted my motherhood. And the responses I was getting from people was insane. It shocked me. Just I was inundated with messages from mothers saying, "Me too, yeah, me too, me too. This is how," and it was pouring out of them. They all wanted to talk about it and how it had impacted them, giving birth in lockdown, or being pregnant, or experiencing very early postpartum in lockdown. And I realised, I thought, oh, hold on a minute. There's a lot of people here who really want to talk about this. And I created just like a community, a Facebook group and things, a lockdown mama community. And it kind of grew from there. And I very quickly realised, okay, this isn't just me that found this hard. And I approached Arts Council England for with an idea for a project, which they funded me for. They awarded me funding to basically encourage other mothers to use writing as a form of therapy. So to write about their experience, and to kind of attempt to tackle some of the trauma that the pandemic had left us with. And it snowballed from there. So I sort of put out a call for, we did a Zoom workshop where, obviously free to attend. It was just, if you were a mother that was impacted by the lockdown, show up, just listen. And this Zoom, there were hundreds of women.
Really? Wow.
It was insane. And I had to do multiple of them because I couldn't physically fit the women in. So that kind of ignited a fire in my belly then.
Yeah.
And it was also a process of healing for me because we were able to talk about our experiences and again feel validated. So that was in turn helping with my process of healing, as well as helping these other women. And I put out a call for submissions. I asked for people to basically write their experience, to write about their experience. All I said was, there's a word limit, and as long as it shows me how you were impacted, how your motherhood was impacted by the pandemic, you can write it however you want. You could do a poem, I can see your diary entry, you can write it as fiction, whatever, but I just need to understand your experience. Send it to me, and we are going to make a book of this, and we are not going to let it be forgotten. We're going to solidify this so you've got it forever, and we get it off our chests onto paper. It's a therapeutic exercise. And again, I didn't expect the response that I got. It was wonderful. It was incredible. We did more Zoom sessions because, such a lot of these women said, I've never written before. I can't write. I'm not creative. That didn't matter. We said,
No.
it doesn't matter about that. It's your
It's your
experience.
story, and
Yeah,
that's
it's
all
your
that matters.
story.
We have that too
Absolutely.
because we do writing groups, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh, well, I'm not a writer. It's just like,
Yeah.
it's your life. That's all the
Yeah.
poetry you need. Just
Yeah.
write it down,
It
and other people will hear it.
And what we got was so rich, and it was devastating, and it was beautiful, and it was everything, all these stories. And yeah, I worked hard to edit them, put them all together. It was hours and hours and hours of work. And
Did you do it all by yourself? You didn't
all
have
by
anyone
myself,
working with you? Wow.
all by myself. So I did that so at this point, this would have been 2022 when this was happening. And yeah, so the book is now Motherhood in Lockdown. It's available to purchase, and it's about this thick, and there are 150 women whose stories we put in the finished book. And it kind of covers everything, all imaginable circumstances, and gives such a strong overview of that time for mothers, and the struggles. And it sort of, reading it all back really validates that experience. And I've had such good feedback from mothers who have read it, who also experienced similar, and they've said, I feel so seen. I feel you've validated my experience. So that's it for me. I've done what I set out to do.
There's we mentioned before we started, there's a quote that you've got on your Instagram, which I just thought was really encapsulate it. It says, to find out you were pregnant with the most precious and loved miracle baby, and then within weeks hear that the very air you were breathing could kill you both.
Yeah.
So powerful. Amazing.
Yes. Yeah, I think that was Hannah, one of our contributors, who, again, not a writer as such, but some of the things that there's such profound statements that were said. And we'd got a lady who gave birth alone because her husband couldn't get to her in time. We'd got a lady who had to show her, she was having trouble with her episiotomy stitches or a tear or something, I can't remember. She had to show it on a video call on her phone to a doctor because that one-to-one in-face support wasn't available. We'd got women who had lost babies and had to experience that alone and had to tell their partners waiting on the car park that they'd lost their baby. You know, some of the most unimaginable traumas. And it is a devastating read, but it's so important as well because it's so important that these women's stories are not forgotten because, you know, it's been 5 years since the beginning of the pandemic. My daughter's 5 now. Being a lockdown mom, it will stay with me forever. I've healed in ways, but that will never leave me because it was my journey into becoming a mother. And, you know, I can't forget that. I can never get those early days back. And I was robbed of that, of what it should have been.
Yeah.
So many of us were. And that's why it's important to remember that.
Yeah, there should be a copy of it in every politician's office,
Mm.
in every high up person of the, you know, the NHS. They should all have a
Yeah,
copy of that informed policy
yeah,
because,
yeah,
yeah, you created that testimony for so many women who
mm,
were forgotten in that point in
yeah,
time.
yeah.
So it's, yeah, well done,
Thank
you.
you.
Well
Yeah,
done. I'm
thank
sure you
you.
heard well done from many people, but yeah, it's good to
Thank you.
keep saying it. Um, so then you obviously your child was growing, still in various lockdowns, so that was challenging. And you mentioned
Yeah.
you lost your father. Was that in
Yes.
that period of time?
That was in, yeah, 2023 we lost him. So my little girl was uh she just turned 3 and I was in the midst of putting this book together actually. So I had to take some time away from that. Um but yeah, that was I always say I was traumatized when I had my first baby and I was traumatized when I lost my dad. And
Yeah,
then my second baby healed me. um but yeah, losing a parent
yeah,
or experiencing grief of anyone who was a massive part of your life is hard, full stop. We all know that it's not a great time in your life. But um what was what traumatized me, and I use the word trauma and traumatized because I know that I was clinically, um was being there when he died, so seeing him die. Um, so I think, you know, actually being there when your loved one passes away is extremely hard. And I had to again work through that. So I had EMDR therapy. Um,
just if for anyone listening who watching doesn't know that, can you just explain what that is?
yeah, so EMDR therapy is, I'm going to have to actually look what it stands for because I don't
Something about
know.
rapid motion
It's eye
desensitizing or
movement
something like.
desensitization and reprocessing. Yeah, so
Okay.
it's a form of psychotherapy that's used to treat predominantly PTSD.
Yeah.
Um, and I had something like 10 sessions of that, and I was very skeptical at first. Um, but I thought I'd give it a go because I was really struggling. I was struggling with, I think I was dealing with the grief aspect normally, like how one should. But
Yeah.
it was the trauma of having seen him die, and I was getting a lot of flashbacks and it was getting in the way of my everyday life. I was finding parenting very challenging. You know, I'd got almost 3-year-old at the time who they don't understand, and you can't say to them, can you just give me a minute because my dad has just died? They just don't. And I remember actually, sorry, I'm flitting now, but just going back to, I went to see my dad again after he'd passed away, a few days after, when he was still in the hospital I don't know what they call it, the mortuary, yeah. I decided to go and see him again, and it was only me who decided to do that, so I went alone, and that was, for me personally, that was a beautiful experience. I just spent an hour with him. I sat with him, talked to him, lay on his chest, stroked his face, and then within 20 minutes, I was back home and I was on my hands and knees having to pretend to be a dog. My daughter was, Mummy, Mummy bark, Mummy. You know, that is just crazy. That's the demand. It doesn't stop. You can't stop being a mother because you're grieving and you're in so much pain. And you just have to keep going. And you don't have space or time to properly grieve. So that is a real challenge to lose someone when you have such a small child. And so this therapy for me, this EMDR therapy, was my little bit of space, I guess, and where I was able to process. And so what that was each session, my therapist used lights. So I'd have to hold one in each hand and I'd have to follow. A light would come on, each one periodically, one at a time, left to right, and I'd have to follow with my eyes the light whilst I was thinking of this particular traumatic memory. And what happens is your brain, something to do with the eye movement, and your brain processes that memory, because when you're traumatized, that memory stuck and it's not been filed away in the filing cabinet system that our brain has and so cleverly does with most memories. The traumatic memory is stuck, which is why you keep rehashing it all the time. And I was getting these intrusive images and these intrusive thoughts. So it needs to be replayed and filed away. And this is what this process does. And it's exhausting. It's an exhausting process, very mentally taxing, very emotional. And we worked through a few different memories and a few different images that I had in my mind. And I was following these lights and nothing was happening for a while. And I, just kept going, kept replaying things in my mind. And then all of a sudden, my body reacted and I started shaking. My hands were like, honestly, like this. I was shaking. And then the tears came and what she said to me afterwards, she said, because I kind of said I couldn't control what was happening to me. It was a bodily reaction that I didn't see coming. It just came out of me. And she said, that's your nervous system. Your nervous system is physically, because it has stored that and now it's processing it again and letting it go. And those physical reactions I was having were very normal in EMDR. And after you've kind of done that, you think again about the memory. And what I personally found, and if it's successful, is it should feel less painful, less difficult to think about. You can remember everything. It doesn't make you forget. You can still reach that, but it's less troubling and less spiky and less painful. So I was able to think about that, and I could have a cry at the sadness of it or whatever, but it didn't trouble me like it did. And it worked. It worked for me. And so again, that all helped with my healing. We actually went over my birth as well, because then I got pregnant with my second, and I said to her, I had a traumatic birth, and that is playing on my mind now I'm pregnant again. So we went over my birth and did these techniques. And again, that took some of the spikiness out of the memories and blurred some of the edges of it a little bit, so they kind of softened a bit. So it's a wonderful thing that I do tell people all about it now, because I mean, fortunately for me, I'm lucky enough that I was able to. I paid privately for that. I found a therapist and paid for private sessions, just out an hourly rate. Because the waiting time on the NHS is unacceptable. So I realised that I was extremely lucky to do that, and I saw it as an investment in myself. But anybody that can, I would really, really promote and encourage that, because it has a high success rate, even for kind of skeptics like me. But it did get me to where I am now, which is a place of I'm okay. I'm okay now.
And your second child, you said, healed you.
Yeah,
That's
so she's 7 months old now. So I'm on maternity leave. I'm still in the early stages of motherhood again, I would say, but because of what happened with the first, I went for an elective C-section with my second. I requested that from day one. I knew, although I say I'd done a lot of work, I knew my limits, and I knew I couldn't do that again. I couldn't risk having the same experience again. So I requested an elective C-section from day one, and that was accepted, and that's what I did. And it was obviously polar opposite experience to my first, physically, but also mentally. I was in control. I was in control. I was part of the process. I had been able to make decisions. I was aware of what was happening. Basically everything that I didn't get the first time. And that was what was healing about it. And so I found postpartum, so much everything was easier. Everything was easier, and I don't know if that was because of that. I don't know, because it was still hard in the sense of having a newborn is hard, but because I was so much better in myself than I ever was with my first mentally, it was a completely different experience. And also having that support as well from other people. My mum could come and help me, and my sister could come, and which I couldn't have before. And so it was worlds apart. And I remember with this time around, even my maternity leave, I've thought so many times, God, I was really robbed of that the first time. It's made me reflect a lot on that first experience, and how and also I think now, my God, I was depressed. I was really, because you don't you can't fully comprehend that, if it's especially if it's your first baby, you've got nothing to compare it to. So you don't know what's normal, what's kind of circumstantial because of the lockdown, what's sleep deprivation, what's baby blues, and what all this stuff is. It's just all
Yeah.
together. But it's now I've had my second, and I can reflect in comparison to how I felt the first time. And I
Mm.
say it all the time, my God, I was depressed. I was so low because it's so different to how I feel now.
How do you think you've changed as a person through what you've been through?
It's changed me in the sense of I'm not scared of anything now. Things that maybe used to bother me before, or, upset me or worry me, they just go over my head. Those
That's good.
experiences, they sort of give you a strength that you haven't asked for, but you do gain. And you encounter things and you sort of think, well, I got through that, so I can certainly get through this.
Mm. Yeah. So
So
Lily
that's
was
a
born
positive.
in May 2020. So
Beginning
if
of
you were
June, she
to,
was born, yeah.
beginning of June, if you were to write a letter to yourself the day before she was born, what kind of things do you think you would say to your future self?
I'd say strap in, strap in, brace yourself. I'd say you're gonna go through the ringer a bit.
Yeah,
The next few years are gonna be beautiful and frightening in equal measure, but you will come out the other side. You will feel the sun on your face again. I'd say take all the help that you're offered. Be kinder to yourself. You're doing a great job, especially under the circumstances. You're not on your own. In fact, you'll eventually see that there are thousands of other women waiting to talk to you about their experience, and you'll make something wonderful from that, and you'll heal, and it will be okay. I think that if I had somebody just to tell me, just to promise me that it would all be okay,
yeah,
but nobody can tell you that at the time. But
yeah,
if I'd had somebody that could promise me that I would
yeah.
get to the point I am now, then
That would have helped.
that would have
Yeah.
helped. Yeah.
So, yeah, the last thing I want to ask. So, I've founded Mothers Uncovered as a place for mothers to talk, and they've written plenty over the years. We've got our own book called The Secret Life of Mothers, which is around
Mm,
50 or so of their experiences. It's, I
yeah.
think, so powerful to
Yeah.
allow someone the space, not just to express it, but to actually get it in writing for other people to
Yeah.
see. So we use creativity in our workshops. So obviously, we can't do that on a podcast, but we'd like to ask our guests if you were on Desert Island Discs and
Mm,
you had to choose your matrescence disc, so something that you associate with your motherhood journey, whether that's pregnancy or birth or
yeah.
being mother of one or two, what would your song be and why?
This was a hard one for me because songs are so emotive, aren't they? And there's many songs
Mm,
that I can't listen to now because I associate them with certain memories, and I'll cry if they're lovely memories, and I'll cry if they're bad memories.
yeah.
um, but when I was pregnant with my first, I used to play for some reason, "Here Comes the Sun," the Beatles, and she used to, when I played that, she used to move around in my belly, and it was summertime, and it was before everything went wrong.
Mm,
And so I have a distinct memory of that. Although I couldn't listen to that song for a long time after she was born because it would just make me sob. Even
yeah.
now I get a little tear. But I'll say that one because it's a song of hope as well, isn't it? Brighter days
Yeah.
are coming, and the song says it's all right. So yeah, "Here Comes the Sun" is one I would say for me.
Mm, that's a lovely choice. Always a Beatles fan myself.
Well, yeah, yeah.
Can't go wrong, really, can you?
You can't, can you know?
So, Daisy, it's been so wonderful speaking to you. Just tell our listeners and watchers how they can find you on Instagram and Facebook. Just give us
Yeah,
your
so
handles.
the community we've got on Facebook is the Lockdown Mama Community. So that's a group that you can request to join if you were impacted by the lockdown at all in your motherhood journey. And I'm mainly on Instagram. That's my favourite place to post. So I'm at Daisie Lane Writes. That's Daisy spelt with an IE. DAISIE Lane Writes.
Thank you very much, Daisy. Thank you so much for
Thanks,
talking to me
Maggie.
today.
Thank you for having me.